My name is Keith Riggs. I am a first year obstetrics and gynecology resident at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston.
Okay. So, I guess we can start off the interview now.
Yeah.
So would you like to start?
With the first question.
What
do you do in your profession or research?
So I'm basically a doctor in training. I have my medical degree, but then you do a few years of like training, like on-the-job training after you graduate medical school, and so I just started that on my first year of it. So I'm doing basically all the kind of stuff that a doctor would do from day to day, seeing patients, doing surgery, seeing patients in clinic, but I'm supervised by a attending physician who was kind of like in charge of everything.
Okay. The next question is, how has your undergraduate degree been helpful to you in what you're doing right now?
So I got my undergraduate degree in biochemistry at U of H, and it's actually really useful, especially in medical school, because there's a lot of biochemistry, especially in the beginning, just trying to get your fundamentals. And so having that like already biology, chemistry, and then biochemistry kind of background knowledge made transitioning to medical school a lot easier. And so for my like day-to-day stuff, I'm not so much doing like the kind of stuff that I studied as an undergrad, but it laid the foundation for the stuff that I am using every day. The kind of stuff that I wouldn't really be able to do if I didn't have that background knowledge of biology and biochemistry.
What made you like major in biochemistry?
Well, I went to a different school for a couple of years, and I was a music major there, but I now wanted to do medicine. So I did pre-med, and pre-med is not like a specific major. It's just like a set of courses you have to do to apply to medical school. And when I transferred to U of H, I decided that I just wanted to go ahead with that full time. And it was either biochemistry or biology, and I tended to like, not so much the actual chemistry, like the hardcore chemistry stuff, but like, I guess like the biochemistry, organic chemistry kind of stuff was more interesting to me, kind of clicked with me. And I figured it would be very useful in medicine, especially if I wanted to do research. And so I focused on that, and that's what I decided to do as my major.
Oh, so like what made you want to be like going to the OBGYN? Like,
I mean, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. My dad's a doctor, and medicine's kind of in my family. My grandfather was a doctor. And for me, it was just kind of like something that I just always felt like I wanted to do. For OBGYN, though, my dad's also an OBGYN, and going into medical school, I was pretty dead set against going into OBGYN because I wanted to kind of do my own thing. But then in my third year of medical school, I rotated through like a OBGYN rotation, and I liked it a lot. And it kind of stuck with me, and I eventually decided that, you know what, like just because my dad's doing it, it's kind of like a dumb reason. You want to go with what you enjoy, you know, regardless of whatever other reason you may have to want to do it or not want to do it. So
what do you enjoy about being like in OBGYN? Because like there's a lot of residents, like different specialties. So like what made OBGYN so special?
OBGYN's really cool in that it's kind of like a little bit of everything in a sense. And I know it doesn't sound like much because you're only treating women and baby, and you're basically taking care of pregnant women half the time. But you get you do a lot of primary care stuff. You're following up with patients, so you get a lot of continuity of care, which is really it's really nice because you feel like you get to know your patients as opposed to just seeing them whenever they're sick. But then there's also a surgical aspect, so you're getting to do surgery and you're getting to manage patients in the hospital and stuff, and that I find like that being able to do both of those things for me I mean, I didn't feel like I could give up either one of those. And so having that kind of continuity of care, being able to see patients throughout their pregnancy and then deliver them is really cool. And then also being able to be in the hospital and see patients in the emergency room or do surgeries and stuff. It was a good mix of everything without having to go too much into one thing or the other, you know.
Do you have any advice for anyone pursuing a degree in biochemistry, especially right now?
It's definitely a tough. It's a tough major, especially like your first biology class, especially your first chemistry class. A lot of people are going to end up dropping it after the first test, because I think a lot of people want to go into like medicine or some sort of medical field, and it's kind of like a shock to them because it's pretty tough, and it requires a certain amount of dedication and studying. And so I think that, like, number one, you want to make sure it's something that you really want to do, because if it's not something that you really want to do, then you're going to struggle a lot with staying up late and studying hard. You're going to struggle a lot with just the extra coursework and the difficulty of some of the classes and stuff, especially like your first 2 years of, or like your first level courses and your second level courses are pretty difficult, just because they're not really what you've ever experienced before for most people. And so I think that making sure that it's something that you really want to do is very important, because without that, then you're gonna struggle for most people. And it's tough, but if it's something you want to do, you'll do it. You'll get through it. So.
Well, during your process into becoming like a resident physician, how do you think your like undergraduate biology classes have like helped you shape into what you are now?
I know that I always kind of go back to organic chemistry because it's like the big bad wolf when people talk about like chemistry or pre-med or it's one of those, like, I wouldn't say like a weed out course, but it's definitely very hard. It's like the hardest course you've ever taken up to that point. But there's a certain point when it will just like click for you, and certain things will just like, at first it just seems like a bunch of arbitrary rules and there's all these exceptions and stuff, and you can't like, you're like, why are these rules, but then there's so many exceptions, we have to memorize all this. But if you kind of figure out like the way it works, then you start to see why there's certain exceptions for things. And I think that sort of mindset of focusing more on kind of like the fundamentals and what, starting out with the basics and then working your way up, as opposed to just trying to flat memorize everything, I think made a huge difference for me, because some people can just memorize everything, but I'm not that type of learner, and I have to understand how things work. I'm a very like hands-on learner, and I think that when that clicked for me, and it really drove home that like a lot of this stuff is really hard, but it's all based off of like principles that are basically like concrete. You can't change the laws of physics or chemistry. I mean, sometimes we find out new things, but for the most part, if it seems like something's an exception, it's not because it's weird, but it's because there's some other rule that you just haven't learned yet. And I think that looking at it from that mindset of this happens, but why does it happen, it makes it a lot easier to kind of connect everything together and remember things, as opposed to having to memorize stuff. I feel like memorizing stuff takes a lot longer, and it doesn't help you out when you run into something that you've never seen before. So.
What do you think has been your biggest obstacle so far?
I think for me, at least with each step of the way, you kind of like, you start in high school, and then you move on to college, and you take your first hard college course, and it's like this huge step, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I cut out for this? And then you get into medical school, or I mean, you have a few more steps like that along the way. Then you get in medical school, it's the same thing. It's like, oh my gosh, this is so much harder than anything I'm used to. Am I really cut out for this? And then you get into resident, it's the same, once you're a resident, it's the same thing all over again. And it's just, a lot of it, I think you don't have to be like the kind of person that already has like a big, like a, you don't need to come into it with, with a ton of strength of character, but you pick it up along the way. And I think for me that like learning the things along the way, like how to study efficiently, how to manage my time, how to organize things in a way that I'm not spending more time trying to organize things than actually doing things. There's just, I think a lot of it is, it's probably 50% actually studying stuff and learning it, and 50% learning how to live a life around it, and be a human being around it.
Well, this is kind of like a awkward but like funny question. Do you have any like undergraduate classes that weren't a part of your pre-med journey that you really enjoyed and that kind of opened your eyes?
Yeah, actually, I took a eukaryotic pathogens class. It's like parasites basically, and it was a lot of like looking at stuff under the microscope and being able to identify things. Pathology almost kind of course where you're looking at things under a microscope and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is this? What's causing this? And I really enjoyed that a lot because, like I said, I'm a very hands-on learner, and so seeing each of these things and kind of like, I don't know, just it was very different from what I was kind of used to, which was things on like a chalkboard and textbooks and stuff, and memorize or like learning like what chemical reaction does this and why does it do that. And so seeing that and kind of like all these different weird little things, that was kind of like, it wasn't so much like about like the fundamentals of biology, but it was very much like seeing like all these different just like organisms, just these like cool creatures, I guess, that like, okay, that's malaria, that's why it's so scary and stuff like that. I thought it was like a good breath of fresh air, because sometimes you get bogged down into like all the paperwork, kind of like schoolwork stuff and textbooks, and it's nice to be able to do something that's a little bit like different and kind of fresh and reminds you of why you're doing what you're doing or what you enjoy about it.
Were there any internships that helped you in finding out that being a physician was the right career path for you?
I think the biggest thing for me was just shadowing a doctor. I shadowed Dr. Farney at UT, and just kind of following him around and seeing like what the kind of day-to-day stuff is like for a doctor. I mean, it was just mostly clinic stuff, but seeing that was really cool. And you see like kind of like I said before, like 50% of what you're doing is just learning how to do the work that you're doing, and not so much like what this medicine does this medicine treats that, but like how to run a clinic and how to see patients on time and how to do all that stuff. And so it was cool to kind of see that other side of it, because I think that's a lot of medicine. I think that's what a lot of people struggle with when they get into medicine, is that we kind of have this romanticized idea of like we go in and we save lives, and but a lot of it is just like day-to-day kind of like see people, make sure they get their shots, and make sure they're taking their medicine, that kind of stuff. And so seeing that aspect of it, and then the other thing that I thought was really cool was I volunteered at Ben Taub's emergency center, and I was just basically like helping them stock stuff and like change beds and stuff, but I got to like sit in on whenever they brought somebody in to triage, or like gunshot wounds or poisoning or car wrecks or anything like that, and that was really cool just to see all that, because like like I said before, sometimes you need to do something that reminds you what you enjoy about what you're doing, and I thought that was really cool just because it was exciting, and it gets your adrenaline pumping.
Do you have any advice? Because since we are in an introductory biology
Mhm.
class right now, many of us are kind of like aspiring to be doctors, farmers,
Mhm.
or anything. Do you have any advice on like what we should do in our classes right now to get where we want to be in the future, like where you are?
I would say, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that like that I know now that I wish I'd known, but I think part of it is like I wouldn't have learned it. Like the only way you can learn it is by doing it, and so like you pull enough all-nighters and you realize like this sucks. I hate doing all-nighters. I'm just gonna tell myself I'm just gonna make myself study like 30 minutes a day. I'm gonna stop by the library after my last class and study for an hour every day or something like that. And you know, things like that. There's like little things that you kind of people tell you to do them, but you won't end up doing them until you kind of go through whatever it is that most people go through to start to kind of get them to start doing it. But I think like the biggest thing for me is that like it's important. I always kind of had this goal of like being like caught up with everything, like having all my work done, having studied for everything, being on top of everything, and that was like my goal. And you know, and that sounds like okay, that sounds good, but on the other hand, it's actually not that good because it you get into this mindset that once you're all caught up, then you're good. But then something will always happen. Something will happen in your life. You know, your car will break down, or you'll get in a bad breakup, or something will kind of get you off of your rhythm, and all of a sudden you're behind again. And I think that like one thing I didn't really learn until like the beginning of my residency is that if you're on time with everything, like okay, that's good, but that's like the bare minimum of where you should be. If anything, you should be trying to make sure that you're getting ahead, and so that you know when you show up tomorrow, you're already prepared for everything. Because just because you're doing things, you have an 11 o'clock patient, you go in, you see them at 11, and then you have your 11:30, you see them at 11:30. Like that's good, but then your 11:30 patient's gonna show up 10 minutes late, and so you still have to see them. Now you're 10 minutes behind, and so it's always important to like don't just rest on your laurels when you are caught up on everything, but start looking ahead and start preparing for what's next, because there's always going to be something that's going to knock you off your rhythm, and now you're behind again. So just kind of preparing yourself for something like that to happen. I think that's like the most important thing that at least a resident learns, is that like if you're on time with everything, then you're behind. You got to be ready for what's coming up next. You can't be like finishing one thing and then starting the next thing right when it's time to start. You got to be ready for it. I think that's one of those things that maybe if I knew that a while ago, I might have actually listened to myself, telling myself that like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. You know, I'm on top of everything, but as soon as something goes off track, or I realize, oh, this test was actually a week earlier than I thought, you know, that sort of thing happens all the time, and so you got to be ready for it. There's nothing you can really do to prevent it.
So is there anything that you would do different, like from the path that you've taken to get to where you are?
Yes and no. I think that there's like steps along the way that I was like, I wish I had actually like put more effort into this, or I'd studied harder for that, and it would make things easier. But in the long run, I mean, I got to where I want to be. I'm pretty happy with where I am. And like, obviously, there's some things that are, I can work on, but like, part of it is like realizing that even like the mistakes that I made along the way, and like times where I messed up, or I failed a test or failed something, and had to, redo it, like that was all still like part of what got me to where I am. And so even if it feels like it's a step back, like it's important that you go through that sort of thing, because that's gets you to where you are. That's part of like what makes the journey. So you may feel like, oh my gosh, I started, I didn't get into this until like a year after everybody else did, or something like that. But that's okay. Like that's, you got to where you are because of everything you've been through. And to take any of that away, you might have done something else. So it's hard to say.
Do you feel as if the career you're pursuing now, the career you're in now, is fulfilling your life's purpose?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of really rough mornings where I have to get up and I have to be at work at like 5 a.m. and it's like, you know, and I work long hours, I'm tired, I want to go home. I just got off like a 24-hour shift and it's like, you know, you're so tired at the end of it, but like, I think about like to myself, like I was asked the other day, like, you know, like, do you like what you're doing? And I'm like, I mean, like, there are things that I don't like doing. Like, I don't like working for that long. I don't like staying up all night. I don't like, you know, there's certain things that you do as a doctor I just don't like to do, but that's, I mean, it's okay. I mean, I enjoy what I'm doing, and that makes it all worth it. And I think that that's like what's important. And I think most people who get into medicine, they don't get through everything it takes to be a doctor without having that, because there's so much BS that you have to go through just to get there, that like doing it for like the money, you know, or the you know, fame or whatever, it's not like, medicine is not really like glamorous. I mean, unless you're like, I guess like a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills or something, you know, but like, you know, there's a lot of it that's just like, it just sucks. And even when you've made it and you're finished with all of your training and everything, there's a lot of it that just sucks. But like, that's like any job, you know, anything you do, there's going to be a lot of stuff you don't like. And but if you really enjoy what you're doing, then it makes it all worth it. I think that's where I am. I feel like there are things that really scared me when I was first starting as a resident. Like the first time I went in and did a surgery, it's like I've never actually been the person doing the surgery. I've always been like watching somebody do it. But once I kind of got over that initial fear and I got comfortable, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much fun. Like, you know, like C-sections, you're like, yeah, okay, they're not great because you don't ever want to have to like, ideally nobody would ever have to have a C-section, but they're fun to do. I mean, you know, they're fun, they're quick. Even the complicated ones, you get out of them and you're like, wow, this is crazy. But, you know, it's, you know, surgery's cool, it's fun. It's, you know, I don't think there's a surgeon that would say that surgery sucks, you know, like, it's fun, it's cool. You gotta cut people open and put them back together. I mean, that's, I don't know.